right, welcome back to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast with Justin and Brandon. We are here to talk about the United States Grand Prix, everything that happened at Circuit of the Americas in Austin. We were there. We saw Max Verstappen's return to the top step for the first time since July. A Ferrari 1-2 on Sunday and so much more. We are here to talk about absolutely everything that went down this weekend. Brandon, how you feeling?
Doing great. I'm excited to talk about our experience and the amazing racing that happened at COTA this weekend.
Yeah, it was incredible racing, maybe the best racing we've ever seen at Circuit of the Americas. As I said, we were there and we took lots of footage. We observed it all. We had a great time. We will be talking more about our specific experiences at Circuit of the Americas and what you can expect if you attend a Formula One race in Austin or somewhere else in a separate video down the line. We're in the middle of a triple header right now, so we have got business to talk about. And we are going to jump right into it with my one sentence rundown, which is: this could have been the best weekend that Circuit of the Americas has ever seen when it comes to Formula One racing. There have been great United States Grand Prix in the past. We have even witnessed wonderful racing 2022. We saw the slow Red Bull pit stop and Max chasing Lewis down. Last year, we saw Lewis chasing Max down and then a disqualification. But this year, even from the sprint, I knew we were in for a good weekend because last podcast, I went on an absolute rant about how sprint racing at Circuit of the Americas is a terrible idea. And then this year, we had like four cars finish within 5 seconds of each other, and Carlos Sainz went on an absolute tear. And I said, okay, I was wrong. You proved me wrong, Circuit of the Americas. Great sprint. I appreciate it. And then the Sunday Grand Prix was absolute cinema. Charles Leclerc went off and walked down the road. We weren't even focused on the two Ferraris at the front of the field for most of the Grand Prix. It was Max Verstappen versus Lando Norris. What a battle that was. George Russell climbing through the field. Liam Lawson having an incredible re-debut. It was just an awesome weekend in Circuit of the Americas, and I couldn't have asked for a better race weekend for us to get to see in person.
Yeah, it was awesome, especially on Sunday. There was just so much going on. There was battles at the front of the field. There was strategy with the pit stops. There's a safety car. Qualifying was dramatic on Saturday as well. I mean, I feel like last year with the sprint, it kind of gave us a good idea of what was going to happen on Sunday, and that's kind of exactly how it played out. But this weekend, it was, kind of all to play for the entire weekend. So, I mean, going into Sunday, it was like there are 4, maybe 5 drivers who could win this race and kind of have no idea what is going to happen. So that's super exciting. It was an awesome weekend to be a part of.
Yeah, so much happened that I even forgot to mention that Lewis Hamilton went off on like lap 2 and we had the first safety car in 6 months. That was also incredible to see, especially if you were the people in front of us who had made a bet on how many safety cars we were going to have during the race. Unfortunately, it hit the under, not the over for that guy who bet his lunch money on the safety cars. Brandon, what is your one sentence rundown from this weekend?
My one sentence rundown from COTA is: this was the perfect display of why Max Verstappen is going to be a 4-time world champion. On a weekend where there was a lot of opportunity for McLaren and Lando Norris to take a big chunk out of that championship lead, Max pulled one out of the bag. He won the sprint race. He qualified extremely well. And when racing happened on Sunday, it was a masterclass of Max on how to keep someone behind for a really long time. And it was just amazing defensive racing to watch. And, honestly, Lando probably could have or should have passed Max like 3 or 4 laps before he ended up doing it. And Max was able to stay with him, and when Lando got that penalty, Max inherited the podium. But it was just great racing, and just the consistency and ability to, like, yes, I know Red Bull brought upgrades, wasn't reflected across. So I would say Sergio's driving wasn't reflective of maybe the upgrades Red Bull brought. So it's hard for me to say how competitive those upgrades are, but Max drove incredibly this weekend, and I think that's why he's going to be 4-time world champion.
It was an absolutely incredible drive from Max Verstappen, and Red Bull did bring upgrades, and there were probably improvements to the car, obviously, but they clearly were still not the fastest car this weekend. That somehow went to Ferrari, which we weren't expecting. They were the one team who didn't bring upgrades this weekend and they ended up crushing it and looked super strong all weekend. But it is hard for me to tell which car is faster, the Red Bull or the McLaren right now. So good thing we've got another race this weekend that will be able to show us how the pecking order truly is. Um, it's probably time that we talk about that Max Verstappen Lando Norris defense and if that penalty that Lando Norris got was deserved. Obviously, we saw it in person, and I was kind of like, 50-50. I don't know if Lando's going to get a penalty. I don't know if Max is going to get a penalty for forcing him off. Upon further reflection, I agree with the penalty because Lando Norris was the driver doing the overtaking. And so when he went around the outside, he was slightly ahead as they entered the braking zone. But when they got to the apex, Max Verstappen was clearly ahead of Lando Norris, and it was Max Verstappen's corner. Yes, they both went off. And so Max got a warning for leaving the track and gaining advantage, breaking track limits. We saw drivers get warnings all weekend long, but Lando Norris actually made an overtake off track, gained a lasting advantage off track by having that overtake. And so I think the penalty was warranted. There's a lot of talk online about why George Russell got a penalty for being the driver on the inside and forcing Valtteri Bottas off, and Max Verstappen get a penalty. Well, in that situation, George Russell was the driver doing the overtaking, and so the onus was on him to make that move. He didn't. He forced Valtteri off, got the 5 second penalty. Maybe it was a little harsh because it wasn't a super massive push off track, but by the letter of the law, George Russell deserved that penalty. Max Verstappen didn't in that same necessary because Lando Norris was the one doing the overtaking. What do you make of that penalty?
I mean, after like in person, my immediate thought is like that's just a racing incident. Like there are two drivers racing really hard. Obviously, this overtake has strong implications on the championship and the race itself. I mean, they were fighting for a podium position. So my initial thought was that it was just kind of a racing incident. But after the penalty was handed out, I mean, it was handed out pretty immediately towards the end of the race. So I think it was right to hand it out quickly and not let it be something that lingered on, you know, the podium celebration and affect that and all that stuff. But I think I agree with you. I think the penalty was fair. And if the stewards are trying to be consistent in the other penalty they handed out, like to George Russell, then I think it's consistent with what they did earlier in the race. So I agree with it. I think, it is unfortunate that Lando got that penalty for him, but at the same time, overtake on the track, keep it on the track, keep it in between track limits, and, you don't run into those problems.
Yeah, and I know that Max forced him off in a way, and Max went off track too. But I mean, the fact still was that Max Verstappen was ahead at the apex, and Lando Norris can't expect Max Verstappen or any other driver for that matter to just allow him to drive around the outside and have perfect room. Like in every single situation, whether it's Max defending that position or not, if the driver is ahead at the apex, they're not going to just let you waltz around the outside and make that move. So I understand that both cars went off track. It's super tricky. If I was allowed to be a Formula One steward, I probably would have just said racing incident, but if they were going to give a penalty, it did make more sense because Lando Norris was the one to drive around the outside and gain a lasting advantage. But because that penalty happened, Max Verstappen outscored Lando Norris this weekend, beat him in the sprint and beat him in the race. There's now 57 points between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. Only 5 rounds remained. Red Bull looked to have a competitive car again. Even if they're not the fastest car, they should be fast enough to allow Max Verstappen to compete for podiums, maybe even a win for the rest of the year. But Ferrari, getting their 1-2, probably should be considered serious title challengers for the constructors. We still got tracks that Charles and Carlos are very competitive at coming up on the calendar. Obviously, they were the fastest car this weekend. They outscored McLaren and Red Bull in the constructors. Should we be thinking of Ferrari as serious title challengers? And is this the end for Lando Norris in his championship fight?
In my opinion, as far as it goes with Lando Norris, I think it's over. I looked at you after this, as soon as the sprint was over on Saturday afternoon, and I said, that's it. It's over for Lando. I mean, it just like he had to be perfect in these last 6 races and the 3 sprints. He had to be on it every single time, and he wasn't this weekend. So in my mind, I think that gap is now too big. So I think the championship is over for Lando, unfortunately, but I think McLaren still has a great shot at the Constructors Championship. They obviously lead right now by 40 points to Red Bull, and then they lead uh, Ferrari by another further 8 points. But I do think Ferrari should be considered for the Constructors Championship. I mean, they scored the most points on both Saturday and Sunday this weekend, and they were the fastest car on in terms of race pace this weekend. After watching it and just seeing the way that those cars were flying across the track, I mean, they were definitely the fastest package, and they didn't bring upgrades. Everybody else brought upgrades, and Ferrari did not, and they beat everybody. And next weekend, I believe Ferrari is bringing upgrades. So hopefully, I mean, if those are positive upgrades, it's only, looking better and better for Ferrari. So the Constructors Championship could come down to the wire, which would be really exciting.
Yeah, let us not forget that Ferrari took a shock 1-2 in qualifying at Mexico last year, locked out the front row. So anything could happen when we go racing again this weekend. Yeah, I think Ferrari have to be serious title challengers for the constructors. I mean, Charles Leclerc just raced off down the road. I mean, it was never in doubt after he took the lead from lap one and then had the safety car restart. He was gone. It felt like every single time he passed our seats at turn nine, he was another half a second ahead of Max Verstappen and just extended that gap the whole time. It felt like he could do whatever he wanted in the pit stops, which he kind of gave himself a pit stop advantage over the cars that were, behind that top four. When he made his pit stop and came out ahead of Oscar Piastri, I was like, it's over. Charles Leclerc has won this race by maybe like an entire day. And so, very dominant performance from Ferrari. They certainly should be considered title challengers. As far as Lando Norris goes, I think the title is over as far as Lando Norris can control. I mean, you said it, he had to be perfect. And as soon as he lost those points in the sprint, we did look at each other and we were like, this could be the end. That's not saying there's no chance. I mean, the gap is close enough that if Max had some kind of DNF, if something happened with Red Bull that they were truly off the pace in one of these races and Lando Norris could get a win, maybe there's still a chance. But at this point, it is Red Bull and Max Verstappen's championship to lose rather than Lando Norris being able to do something on his end to actually win the championship. So it is probably out of his hand. So now we look to the constructors to see hopefully a good title battle, and that is looking like it will come down to the end. But a team that is out of the Constructors' Championship is Red Bull because they are really fighting with one driver. Sergio Perez finished in P9 on Saturday, did not score any points, had a slightly better Grand Prix, but still finished P7 because he finished behind George Russell, who started from the pit lane and managed to overtake Sergio Perez and finish ahead of him with a 5-second penalty added on as well. So that means we have to ask, maybe a slight overreaction, but is Liam Lawson the answer for Red Bull? Had an incredible debut, re-debut, whatever you want to call it this weekend, going from P19 to P9. He beat Yuki Tsunoda, who, yes, had the worst strategy, but Yuki also made a mistake, spun on his own, and kind of went a little crazy on the radio, being upset that Liam Lawson came out ahead of him after his pit stop, and just, more evidence of Red Bull why they don't want to have Yuki Tsunoda was that reaction right there. And then Liam only finished 2 spots behind Sergio Perez, who, like I said, was beaten by George Russell. So we've said this is an audition for Liam Lawson. Does that mean he is looking like the driver that should be considered for the 2025 Red Bull seat?
I mean, I think you have to consider Liam for the Red Bull seat, regardless of the performance this weekend. But this performance, I mean, only solidified that, hey, it was a good decision to give him a chance and put him in that car. And I mean, he now is scoring valuable points for V-Carb as well, who is in a pretty tight battle with Haas in the midfield of the Constructors' Championship. And, Haas had a great weekend this weekend as well. So it's important that Liam's scoring those points and contributing to the Constructors' fight, which you could argue that Sergio is not really contributing to very much right now. And to see him out there having a great drive and enjoying his time in Austin was pretty cool. But I think Liam is looking better and better with each performance. He had an okay sprint race, and then an even better Grand Prix. That was good strategy, good driving. He started from in the back of the pack and was able to score points, which is pretty awesome in that V Carb car.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he had a good sprint race, had some good battles with Fernando Alonso that got a little spicy and then continued on to Sunday. I thought it
He
was a
did.
great drive from Liam Lawson for him to be able to start on those hards, make them last as long as he did, and then make the overtakes that he needed to make on the mediums at the end of the race to get back into the points. I thought it was a very impressive drive. I think it was clear yesterday that hard to medium was the preferred strategy over medium to hard. But he still had to go make those overtakes, and there's still something to be said from that. He did make those hards last a long time and made good overtakes on those hards. Like it became pretty clear that he was the highest running car that was doing the hard to medium strategy from the back of the grid and then put himself in position to score 2 points at the end of the weekend. So I thought it was a great drive from Liam Lawson. He certainly has to be in consideration for that Red Bull seat because Sergio Perez did not have a good weekend. I hope he has a good weekend next weekend because it's his home Grand Prix. But you look at these upcoming tracks, and none of them are standout, locked Sergio Perez great performance tracks. So we'll just have to see how the rest of the year goes. Obviously, you can't make a call based on one Grand Prix to say that Liam Lawson deserves the Red Bull seat. I think certainly this has locked in his seat for next year on the grid. Technically, this is just a 6 race contract with VCarb, and the 2025 second VCarb seat hasn't been announced. So I'm fairly confident that he has done enough to warrant a seat on the grid next year. It just depends on what team it ends up at.
Yeah. It's interesting how his contract was laid out that it's really only 6 races, and Red Bull's really kind of leaving the door open there because I think they want to reshuffle things. And we said earlier in the year that it wouldn't make a lot of sense for Red Bull to lock in their second seat driver really early in the year, and they did it pretty early
Yeah.
with Sergio Perez. And at the time, we both said that didn't make a lot of sense, And I think now might be the time where Red Bull's looking back at that and being like, maybe Justin and Brandon were right. Maybe we should have listened to them. But I'm joking. But I think it's interesting to think about like Red Bull announcing that really early in the season, and now we're in this situation where you have the messy exit with Daniel, and you have Liam, and they haven't announced one seat officially yet, and Sergio's still under contract, but there's all kinds of rumors, and nobody really knows what's happening. It just seems all very convoluted and kind of messy. But had they waited, maybe it wouldn't be as messy. I don't know. Hindsight is 2020, but it's certainly an interesting situation, and Liam's doing a great job right now.
Yeah, it feels like we are just talking in circles around this Sergio Perez thing because he gets confirmed for a contract and then he proceeds to underperform. And it's just really unfortunate that we have to keep having these conversations for sure. And then something else added into the fray is Isaac Hadjar, who's now the reserve driver that Liam Lawson has stepped up. And Isaac Hadjar could very well win F2 this year and not have a seat in that series next year. And where does he fall into that? And I think he is also a very talented driver who could perform well in that second B carb seat should Liam get that main seat. So we'll just have to see what happens with Red Bull. And obviously, we have all seen and heard the rumors of Sergio Perez announcing his retirement. So all will be made potentially a little bit clearer this weekend. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. Before we wrap up our predictions, who was your top step driver of the weekend, the very best driver from the United States Grand Prix?
I've gone with Carlos Sainz. I think Carlos drove a fantastic Grand Prix on Sunday. He had a good pit stop strategy that allowed him to undercut and get ahead of Max Verstappen, and that allowed Ferrari to have an amazing 1-2 finish. But he drove a great race. He kept a really good gap to Max to make that undercut possible. He was fighting with him a little bit, and then dropped back probably to save tires. And he kept that gap at like 1.7 to 2.0 for like 20 laps, which was incredible. Allowed that to happen, and obviously Carlos had a amazing sprint too, storming through the field, and I think he had a great weekend. He's enjoying his last few races at Ferrari, it seems, and I think he will go down as just a beloved driver for Ferrari that everybody, had a great, fond time working with, and he's given a lot to the team, and I think they appreciate it. Um, so
Yeah, I mean, it is just very unfortunate that we are going to see Carlos Sainz racing towards the back of the grid next year because I think he just provides us with even more evidence that he is one of the best drivers on the grid. And under any other circumstance, he would have extended his contract with Ferrari for another 2, maybe 3 years. But when Lewis Hamilton comes knocking, unfortunately, one driver has to go, and it was Carlos Sainz who was out of a contract. But he did have a great weekend. Lovely sprint, out qualified Charles Leclerc for the main Grand Prix, and then did that undercut on Max Verstappen and held him off with like 6 or 7 lap older tires. So great race from Carlos Sainz. I have gone with the other Ferrari driver, obviously Charles Leclerc. Was probably the second quickest Ferrari driver on Saturday, but then was the class of the field on Sunday. Absolutely dominant performance. Another great drive from Charles Leclerc. Was never in doubt, just managed the race incredibly well. And so he has got to be my top step driver of the weekend. Let's recap our predictions from this weekend. Podium pusher of the weekend, I predicted Max Verstappen, which I'm going to give myself a point for. Won for the first time since the Austrian sprint. He won the sprint race on Saturday and then a podium on Sunday. I think that is very great performances compared to what we have seen from Max Verstappen before the little autumnal break. So I think Max Verstappen has to get a point for podium pusher of the weekend.
yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I said it at the beginning of the podcast, but I think Max drove a great drive. Um, on Saturday, obviously he won the sprint, and on Sunday, um, finish on the podium. It was a great result for him and the team. So yeah, I agree with you. It was a great weekend for Max Verstappen. So that was a good prediction. The Red Bull upgrades seem to help a lot. So yeah, I had Lando Norris for my podium pusher prediction.
No,
I
I
think
can't. I can't give you the point. He
yeah,
lost
you know what?
ground to Max Verstappen in the
Yeah,
championship, probably sealed his fate of P2 in the Drivers' Championship. It was a good weekend from Lando Norris. Can't complain. He got solid points, drove reasonably well, qualified on pole, but just the championship ramifications, I don't think I can give you the point for it.
yeah. I mean, I agree with you. The last like 5 seconds, I was trying to come up with the words to make an argument, but I don't even have it in me. I agree. I don't deserve that point. Lando had, like you said, it was a good weekend. And if McLaren was only fighting for the constructors championship, then it'd be like, okay, that was a solid weekend from Lando. Unfortunate penalty, but they made up good ground in the constructors. But no, yeah, doesn't count. So it's unfortunate for me, but it's okay.
Yeah, that's all right. Back marker of the weekend, I went with Sergio Perez, which I think has to be a yes out in SQ2 and then finish behind the Haas's and then to get beat by George Russell on Sunday. I just think it was a poor weekend from Sergio Perez. And it was very sad because the Mexican fans are very passionate about Sergio Perez and they were just defeated this year. I mean, they would try and start the Sergio Perez chants in the stands and it would just die. No one was in the mood to cheer for Sergio Perez, which was sad to see. And I think that's enough evidence in itself that he's back marker of the weekend. But his performance on track kind of backs it up as well. So I think that's another point for me.
Yeah, I agree. Just him getting overtaken by George at the end of the race was just cherry on top. It was a poor weekend from him, and just seemed like there were less Checo fans in the stands, or maybe they were just less vocal because it seemed like they had less to cheer about this weekend. But yeah, the chants would start and then slowly fizzle off, which was kind of sad to see. But it's okay. Maybe next year we'll see. We don't really know. But yeah, my back mark of the weekend. I went for kind of bold take, Liam Lawson, and no, definitely not. He started at the back of the grid, scored points, almost beat Sergio Perez. beat his teammate Yuki Tsunoda. So it was a great drive from Liam on Sunday. So yeah, I think there's no way I get the point for that one, unfortunately.
I mean, there was a chance after the sprint, had his lap time deleted and was out in SQ1 and then didn't score points in the sprint. But then Sunday happened and he definitely had an incredible race. So can't give him back marker there. Let's go a little quicker through the rest of these sprint pole predictions. I went for Lando Norris, which did not happen.
Yeah, for Charles Leclerc, which also didn't happen.
Sprint winner, I went for Lando Norris. Did not happen.
Also went for Lando Norris. So unfortunate.
A lot of no's from us. It doesn't get better from here. Sprint, Grand Prix pole position, I went for Charles Leclerc. Did not happen.
And I went with Oscar Piastri, which definitely did not.
Speaking of Oscar Piastri, really quick, he was kind of off the pace this weekend. Maybe a little out there for McLaren, but it kind of makes sense. We saw him have a poor performance at this Grand Prix last year, so don't really know what was going on with Oscar Piastri, but was his worst weekend in a while for sure.
Yeah, I was kind of driving around in no man's land there in like P5 for pretty much the entire race. But yeah, it was an okay weekend from Oscar, which has not been normal recently.
Yeah. Well, I predicted him to finish P3, which did not happen.
And I predicted Charles in P3, which definitely didn't happen.
But you predicted him on the podium, so you got that right at least. I went for
That
Max Verstappen in P2. It did not happen.
and I went with Oscar Piastri in P2. And then we both predicted Lando Norris to win the Grand Prix, which
Just a
definitely.
horrible showing from us this weekend, unfortunately. A lot of no's on those, but it gets a little bit better in our bold predictions. My first bold prediction was that the top eight in the sprint race is all eight drivers of the top four constructors. And then immediately I thought that that was a stupid way to word that prediction. And it should have been the top eight qualifying drivers remained the top eight, which is what happened. But I don't deserve a point for it because the heart of it was right, but the point itself was wrong. So no point for me. And then my
But
second bold prediction. What?
I think we give you half a point because it kind of happened. If you don't want the half point, you don't have to take it. But I think you could make the argument that it was a good prediction, and you know it happened. So I know it was coming from a place of not enjoying sprint races in Austin. Admit it was actually a good sprint, but I think you could. I think we could give you a
I don't
if
know.
you.
The fact that I was so anti-sprint and then it was a banger of a race and the prediction was wrong, I probably don't deserve it. But I'll keep it in my back pocket. If we're like tied at the end of the year, then I'll just whip the half point out and we'll see what
Yeah, and
happens.
that'll be the tiebreaker. That'll be our tiebreaker.
And then my second push and prediction was that Haas would score the most point of any midfield team, which, yes, it did happen. They scored 7 points. Great performance from Haas on home soil, their best weekend ever in the United States. So that prediction was correct.
Yeah, I think it was the American themed delivery that gave them a few extra miles an hour this weekend, helped them score some points. My predictions were kind of the same. I looking back on this prediction, I don't know why I did it, but I said that Lance Stroll was going to score points. He did not do that at all. So that's really unfortunate. I don't know why I ever predict Lance Stroll to do anything remotely good anymore. Um, won't be doing that in the future. And then Sergio Perez finishing behind a driver that is not in the top four teams. That definitely did happen. Thank you, Haas, once again for that. So yeah, not a great weekend from Sergio, but that equals point for me. So
Yeah, and you're welcome for it because you wanted to make it only Sunday and it happened on Saturday and I allowed it.
true.
So
That's
you're
true.
welcome. That's a
Thank
gift
you.
from me, the kindness of my heart. That point is yours. The fans at machine_Chaz says Haas scores big points. We define that as at least 5 points, and it did happen. So point for him. At PBK_96_ says Max gets a grand slam. Was looking great after the sprint. Probably would have gotten pole had George Russell not crashed, but was not even close to winning the Grand Prix, so no points there. And at Dafted_Punked_ says Red Bull will have their worst weekend of the season and fall even further off the pace. which did not happen. They looked a little bit more on the pace. So mixed bag from the fans. Pretty terrible bag from us this weekend, but it is a triple header, so we will have more points later or more predictions later this week, which hopefully means more points after the Mexican Grand Prix. That is all we have got for our recap of the United States Grand Prix. Before we get out of here, Brandon, what are your parting podium thoughts?
Parting podium thoughts is it was an awesome weekend, and I was just really happy to be there, watch great racing with some great people. It was a lot of fun. The weather was great. We got to see not only good Formula One racing, but good racing in other series as well. Um, it's just a lot of fun. So I'm really thankful for that. Thankful that we get to be sitting here talking about Formula One together. It is awesome. And yeah, parting podium thoughts.
There you go. Great parting podium thoughts. It was an awesome weekend in Austin. So glad that there were so many awesome Formula One fans there. If you were in Austin, we hope you had an amazing time. I got a friendship bracelet from someone, so whoever gave me that, thank you. I appreciate it. I did wear it all weekend. But thank you for listening to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast. We will be back later this week for our predictions for the Mexican Grand Prix. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, do all of the things on whatever platform you are watching or listening on. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all of the places. We are there, and we are so thankful for your support. And we will see you in the next one.